Welcome to another virtual Live Talks Los Angeles event. We welcome Chad Sanders and Will Packer to our series. We invite you to visit our YouTube channel for over 300 conversations, much like this, I say, although they're all very different. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Our handle is Live Talks LA. Chad's new book is Black Magic: What Black Leaders Learned from Trauma and Triumph. Chad is a writer, director, actor, and musician. Previously, Chad worked at Google and YouTube and as a tech entrepreneur. He has since written and co-written TV series and feature films with collaborators such as Spike Lee, Morgan Freeman, and Will Packer. Will has produced or executive produced a wide range of movies and television shows. His movies have grossed more than $1 billion worldwide at the box office, and some of those films include The Photograph, Girls Trip, Night School, Little, What Men Want, Ride Along 2, No Good Deed, Think Like a Man 2, Ride Along, Think Like a Man, Takers, Obsessed, Breaking In, and Stomp the Yard. I'm going to let Will take it from here. They'll chat for the next 50 minutes or so. Take it here, Will.
All right, awesome. Ted, thank you very much. Now we're going to turn it on to the man of the hour, my brother, my young brother, Chad. How you doing, man? Good to see you.
I'm great. It's good to see you too, man.
All right, so I got my hands on this book. All right. The title itself bears repeating. Black Magic: What Black Leaders Learn from Trauma and Triumph. Couple of what do you call these when people say such good things about your book at the end? You put it on the cover, it's all shiny and stuff. What's the official industry title for these things? Endorsements?
Yeah, endorsements is the fancy name. I call them blurbs.
Blurbs. Okay. I want to read a couple of blurbs. Okay. This one is from an Academy Award winning actor. Chad has a unique ability to turn his experiences and the experiences of others into a guidebook that will inspire many healthy decisions. This is Chad's superpower. The one and only Morgan Freeman said that about you, sir. Black Magic is the book we need urgently in this moment. Chad's voice is clear, direct, and honest. There is so much for us all to learn from the lives explored in this beautiful read. That is from a New York Times bestselling author herself, Grammy-nominated artist, and the voice of New York, the one and only Angie Martinez. I'll read you one more. This is from a record-breaking film and TV producer. Our world has never been more at peril, our country never more divided, and the need for smart, unifying voices never more clear. Chad's perspective is bold and unapologetic while simultaneously being inclusive and non-judgmental, an incredibly difficult balance that Black Magic achieves marvelously. That is by yours truly, Will Packer. I am that record-breaking film and TV producer. So, all right, first of all, how does it feel when you have folks like that, right? You are relatively young in the game. Mm-hmm. You, I would imagine these are luminaries, people that you look up to, people that have inspired you, in ways, because there are many other amazing blurbs. How does it feel? Before we even get into the book, just tell me, how does it feel for you in this moment to have that level of validation?
Every time someone said something like that about the book, it felt honestly like a dream come true all over again. I was grateful, surprised, shocked to have one person say something like that. You know what I mean? And every single time it was like being doused with, cold water. It was like I needed to snap back to reality. Not so much because I didn't think I could write a good book, or that I had written a good book, but just because these people are legends. There's 1,000 books and movies and documents that, land on their desk every day, and they have to choose. I've seen that from learning from you, Will, like a million things come across your desk every day. You have to choose one or two to put your real focus and energy on each day. And that those people chose my book in this moment in such a crazy time when people have so much else going on with their families, with the world we live in right now, with their communities. It was very meaningful. And I think the other side of that for me is it comes with responsibility that, writing the book was sort of step one. And now these people were putting their voices behind the book. So now I have a new job, which is to be a champion of the book and make sure that it sees as many hands and eyeballs as possible so that the message in that book reaches the world.
Well said. It's also a testament to the way these people view you, your work ethic, your potential. So receive that and receive it earnestly, which I know that you do.
Thank
Black
you.
Magic. Why'd you call the book Black Magic?
So the first thing was, I mean, it was really just the double entendre of it all. There is the magic that I believe that we possess as Black people that comes from suffering. And the other side of that double entendre is just artistically, I liked to evoke this idea of sort of like the macabre and the twisted, you know. I thought that was striking. I thought that would, I gravitate towards dark and twisted things, sometimes edgier things. And I thought that people would be stopped in their tracks by that. But the third sort of element of it, the third dimension of it, is that this magic that we're talking about and that we're going to get into, it comes from examining and exploring things in our pasts that we often try to push down and repress and look away from because they're scary, because they were hurtful, because those moments in our lives were painful and we don't want to have to look at them. We don't want to have to relive them over and over again. And that essentially is what I'm talking about when I say Black magic, is to go back into that closet where you've hidden all the things that hurt you along the way and slammed the door and locked it shut. Go back in there, pick up every moment, look at it, live with it, and see what you can take that will be useful for you.
That's well said. I want to ask you about the timing with everything that you just said. And you talk about trauma, you talk about triumph. Clearly, right now is a time that feels like both. As Black people, it often feels like a never-ending trauma, right? It often feels like just some moments are less traumatic than others, and we call that triumph. But it always feels like the trauma is right there. Given that, and with everything that you just said and that you wanted to get out, right? Why now? Is this the right time, given everything going on in the world, for a book like this?
I think it is. I think that the reception of the book is, to this point, is the proof of that. I think, so I wasn't done with the book when the atrocity around George Floyd occurred last year, and sort of when all of these atrocities and murders of Black people by police and by white people were happening last summer, and the riots and the protests that followed. I was still writing the book, and that was an enormous swell of energy around Black life and Black trauma while I still had my fingers on the keyboard. And so that moment kind of took over this book. That moment sort of changed the way that I was thinking about how spare and how honest and how detailed I needed these accounts to be. I went back and called people back to say, now that we're going through this, some of the interview subjects, is there anything you want to add around your experience that should go in this book? Because it just felt like, I think in anything, I mean, I know for you as a storyteller and as an entrepreneur, you know, you find these windows of opportunity that open and shut. And for this book, it felt like last summer was this window that was opening for this exact message. And I wanted to make sure that it fit that window. So now that it's out in the world, what I'm seeing as we transition from Donald Trump to, you know, Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris, it feels like there is this shift where people are like, okay, we see where we have neglected the Black experience. We see where we have caused harm to Black people. We are interested and hopeful and want to learn how to do better by them. I wanted to make sure they too had this book as a resource to use to learn how to be better allies, not just observers, not just spectators, as Black people try to make something happen for ourselves.
That's great, brother. And I wondered if you had the opportunity, which you said you did, to go back and revisit some of the conversations that you have in this book, given the current landscape of things. I'm glad that you did. I want people to understand the voice from whence this comes. Okay, Chad Sanders, who are you? Where did you come from?
Yeah. So I came from Silver Spring, Maryland. My parents were professionals. They were, Black folks in their early 30s when I was born who had postgraduate degrees. We were middle class. We came from, or I lived in a suburb of Washington, D.C. My dad was a Black man from, I don't think he would characterize it this way, but I would. He was from the hood in Detroit. He had sort of worked his way out, and basketball gave him a way to Columbia University, and he went to law school and he built a life for himself. My mom was a military brat. She was an executive at Verizon for 30 years. And so out there in the suburbs, we were like, in a way, before our time as this little Black family in the cul-de-sac neighborhood with a lot of white neighbors. I had a lot of white classmates in all my classrooms. I had, I was in a lot of ways surrounded by whiteness. And my parents took it on themselves to use our house and our dinner table specifically as these places to make sure me and my sister understood our Blackness and understood it not just in the context of trauma and slavery and terrible things that have happened to us, but also in its greatness, also in its creativity, also in, the gifts that it provided for us. And so my life as a kid was this process of getting that education at home and then going back to school every day and getting the opposite, getting teachers telling me, not explicitly, but by their behaviors, that I wasn't as smart as my classmates. I wasn't special. I wasn't interesting. I didn't deserve to be listened to. And growing up with that paradox made me, I think, sort of turn inward and made me someone who lived in my head for a long time. And I think that's the experience of many writers. And that is sort of what I became.
It's interesting because I can relate myself, middle class upbringing, but always being very aware of my Blackness and getting one view, definition of Blackness at home, like you, but then another one in the majority white environments that I traversed, like you. I want to know, like, how did that experience, that, nobody explicitly saying you're less than young Black boy, but obviously implicitly there being things that made you feel like that was certainly the overriding opinion of the majority, right? The ruling class that you were interacting with. So how does that, number one, young Chad Sanders today, what level of influence did that have on you then? How does that still impact you and your voice today?
Yeah, I mean, in many ways, I think that is the question, because I will say that I'm 32 now. I would say from the ages of 25 to now, I have been going through this process of trying to get back to the voice and to the way that I saw the world when I was that little kid. I was defiant at that age. I was seething. I was, I didn't let my teachers get away with anything. I didn't let my classmates get away with anything. And I think over time, the weight of whiteness as a dominant culture, it just crushed my spirit a little bit more. And my spirit was rekindled when I went to Morehouse, which I think we'll get into. But then when I got back into industry, or when I got back into the white world in Silicon Valley, the weight of whiteness was greater than anything I had experienced until that time. And it completely flattened me. And that's when I decided the only way that I can have power in this world, the only way that I can have money in this world, is if I assimilate, is if I use this instinct that I have, this observant writer's instinct, to watch behaviors, be empathetic to the white experience, and copy it and placate it and kowtow to it. So that's what I tried to do. And it was a horrific failure. It crushed me from the inside out. It made me disappointed in who I was. It made me think that I could never be as good as. It made me feel like as much of an act as I was trying to portray white sensibilities, I could never actually do it in a way that was convincing. And around the age of like 25, 26, as I mentioned, I just kind of gave up and surrendered back to who I was. And since that time, I've been probably over rotating in the other direction, to be honest, in just trying to be such a voice of who I believe I was before any of that happened, trying to let that voice really like shout out at the loudest decibel level. Does that answer the question?
It does. It's good. And you know, you use a term, the weight of whiteness. And I think that's well said and apropos, because it does feel like a weight, like a constant burden that's there all the time, doesn't it?
It does. It does. You know, it's so much there. This came up in a conversation a few days ago. Someone asked me, she said, well, what was it like when you went to Morehouse and none of those white influences and none of those white markers of prestige were there? And I laughed. I said, well, they were still there. We brought them with us in some regard. That's the weight of whiteness, is that it lives in your head. It's not just when you're in a room full of white people. It's not just when Will and Chad go to a meeting at a studio and there's white executives there. It's when we're on the elevator after that meeting or on the way to that meeting, and we're thinking about, not to sort of put you on the spot, Will, but we're thinking about, who do we need to be in this meeting to sell this project to these white people? And, you know, Will, I think I'm sure you still have your own battles with that, but something I admire about you is that you have sort of planted your flag on Blackness. That is something that is hard for people my age, younger than me, to do, because there aren't that many examples of it. What I saw when I worked at Google in my early career was a CEO who was white, 2 white founders, a board that was almost entirely white. The only Black person I saw in senior leadership, as I remember it, was David Drummond, the head legal counsel, who I think is gone now. So in my mind, it was just like, if you want to be successful, if you want to be successful in the way that you see it, not like you want to be a middling success, but you want to be like a Fortune 500 leader, you have to learn how to be white and how to make white people feel good, because look around you. So that to me is the weight of whiteness.
That's well said, and that's honest. And it's so much to me about the truth of this book, because you said, you know, you referenced me, and I'm at a certain position in the industry, so that you know, I feel like I can definitely be unashamedly me and who I am. But I've, you know, that's been a career long journey to get to the point for me to, whether it's true or not, have that confidence in it. Right. And I think your book is a tool and a resource for, like you said, so many people that don't have that example, who will look around a corporation like you did and say, oh, okay, success looks like this, you know, white male. You know, straight white male, I would imagine. That's what success is. If I'm going to assimilate, I need to understand how to go along to get along with that culture. I need to know how to seamlessly transition into that culture. And if you don't have access to viewpoints of successful people who have done it a way that perhaps is more aligned with your innate abilities and skill sets and the culture that you were raised around, without having that, which I think this book is a tool to do, it can be challenging. Now, you mentioned Morehouse. So I want to go there for a little bit, right? You are, you're coming out of Silver Springs. I am sure that you had options in terms of where you were going to go to college. I would imagine the way that you brought up, it was always going to be college. That wasn't a question, but I'd love for you to talk a little bit about that choice to go to college, then to go to an HBCU, and specifically to go to Morehouse.
Yeah. You know, at that point in my life, I wasn't making decisions very consciously yet. I think that honestly, and this is a testament to HBCUs, I would say, the decision to go to Morehouse was inertia. I did have opportunities to go to other schools. I did have opportunities to go to an Ivy League school. But from the time I was born, my mom, who was a graduate of Spelman College, the sister school right beside Morehouse, she kept such an environment of HBCU graduates around my sister and I, where at every turn, such that I was so comfortable with the idea of going to an HBCU, even though I had never actually stepped foot on one until I was a senior in college, as I remember it. So it was just one of those things. It was like, you're going to go to Morehouse, especially, I imagine my mother was thinking at that time, especially because of the way that you're growing up in this suburban community, in these very white classrooms. I need to make sure that you, Chad, and you, Shannon, my sister who went to Spelman, that you two have this sort of cultural foundation before you're on your own out there. Now, in retrospect, I think that quote unquote decision that I made, which was really inertia, was one that was life changing and life saving for me in a lot of ways. I can't imagine having gone through that experience of whitewashing that I told you about, and then realizing, if I had ever even realized, wow, I really need to like get back in touch with who I am, get back in touch with my culture. I don't know where I would have turned to do so. But when I hit that point at 25, 26, I had an entire community of people around me in my life from that Morehouse experience who I could be close to, who I could talk to, who I could find empathy from. And they made it so easy for me to really just retreat back into Blackness the way that I needed to at that time.
You know, you said it saved your life. I mean, you didn't say that with the flair of an exaggeration. I guess it goes without saying you'd make the same decision again. I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about, what you think your voice, your existence might have been without that HBCU foundation that you talk about.
Absolutely. Well, let's start at a low-hanging fruit point, which is, how do I feed myself? I am a screenwriter. I am a writer. Who are the producers who have championed me? Will Packer, HBCU graduate. Spike Lee, HBCU graduate. There are probably 5 others who I could name, 4 of which are HBCU graduates. When I was trying to get my first job at Google, one of my classmates at Morehouse was the person who championed me there. When I was trying to leave Google and go get my next job at a tech startup, another HBCU graduate, Brian Shields, both of these guys are in the book, championed me there. I think and I go into this in the book, at every step where I needed an escape hatch or an opportunity, or for somebody to give me a leg up to the next thing in my life that I wasn't really even necessarily fully yet qualified for, it's generally been a Black person who has given me that hand. And I'd say 85% of the time it's been an HBCU graduate. And I think that is partially because, not just because we're all Black and we see community there and we see each other in each other, but also we learned over those 4 and for some 5, 6, 7, 8 years, how important it is to send the elevator back down, because then one day somebody's going to send it back down for you. I'll say on the other side of that saved my life thing, there's a interview in the book, guy named Grayson, and that's a fake name. It's another person's name under a pseudonym, the only person who has a pseudonym in the book. He went to a very white liberal arts school in the Northeast. He was the president of a white fraternity somehow. And one of his frat brothers in that fraternity, white guy, called him a nigger in the frat house drunkenly one night, and Grayson swung, broke that guy's jaw. And that school, all of his frat brothers at that school and many of his classmates turned on him quickly, and the school summarily expelled him. And where he landed back on his feet and what saved his life in a much more material way was that he ended up at Morehouse. And from there, he relearned how to be who he is. That to me is one of the greatest testimonies to the HBCU experience that I've ever known.
That's huge. And everybody else in the book is identified for who they are. You use a pseudonym for Grayson based on the stories that he told you and his current position, I would imagine.
That's right.
Is it her?
Yeah. It's a man. And, that was a part of the experience of writing this book. I interviewed about 240 people for this book. There's 15 interviews that actually made it in, but I would say probably 40% of those interviews didn't make it in because people were so scared of offending white people with what they had to say about their Black experiences. They were afraid to lose jobs for the celebrities. They were afraid to lose sponsorships. They were afraid to lose their relationships to neighbors and friends. And that's not my choice, obviously, but I can understand.
Yeah. I mean, it's just another manifestation of that weight of whiteness that you talk about, right? That, anybody who I would think, you can tell me your opinion, is part of a marginalized, minority, disenfranchised community or culture, labors under that weight, I would imagine. Obviously, Black people have a very specific relationship and experience with white people, but I think that all marginalized people, because of what whiteness is, especially in this country, feel on a daily basis the impact of that. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, that's right. I would say, to put a point on it, it's how closely connected whiteness and financial distribution and the legal system are intertwined. It feels like if you get on the wrong side of that thing, you could be broke or in jail or worse really, really fast. So, that is the boogeyman. The idea of this idea floats around Hollywood so much, this idea of being blackballed. And I hope that idea is being exposed quickly as a farce, but just the idea of not being, I spent the first 4 years after I left Google still afraid that I wouldn't just be able to get a job at Google again. Not even just get a job, but that I wouldn't be able to go back home to the mothership one day. That is the fear. That is it.
Okay. So you stated that when you started writing this book, it was so that you could find answers on your journey to becoming a Fortune 500 CEO.
Correct.
And it would seem that you were talking to the right people who could certainly help facilitate that dream and getting some of the answers and resources that some of the people reading the book will have that same aspiration potentially, right? To reach the highest levels of corporate America. What happened with you?
Why am I not a Fortune 500 CEO?
Or are you on your way? Did the plan change? Something in the book? Should people read this book if they're in corporate America? Will it make them quit? Will it make them turn the desk over and walk out that day? I don't know. What you tell us.
It might, Will. For me, it was seeing. So just to get the data out there are obviously 500 Fortune 500 CEOs. Today, as we speak, 4 of them are Black. So that's 0.8%. That is to say that if that's what you want to do, and you are a Black person, the odds are obviously against you. That's not to kill your dream, but it's just to so that you can face the reality that to get to that point, you are going to have to be not just exceptional, but exceptionally lucky. And as you read this book, and as I did the interviews for this book, I had to face the fact that it would also mean I was going to have to spend a lot of my life very uncomfortable. And in some regards, in some regards, just kind of squashing who I was to build relationships, to be in the right rooms, to live in the right communities, to go to the right country clubs. And as I wrote the book over 4 years, I punted on that dream. For one, it wasn't really what I wanted anyway. I think if I'm being honest, it's probably a little closer to what some people older than me who loved me wanted for me. But it was also that I had experienced just 4 years of that pain of trying to contort myself around whiteness, and I didn't want any more of that. And so I am now going after hopefully that same level of self-actualization and influence and fun, but as an artist and not as a corporate executive. That's what happened to me.
Can I read a couple excerpts from the book?
Yeah, please.
I'd love to read a couple and just get you to give us a little bit of a reaction, and a little bit of where you were thinking at the time. First one I want to read is it's from the first chapter, Home and Neighborhood.
Yeah.
I don't remember what I was wearing when I ran from my 250 square foot apartment to Google's mammoth Chelsea office, which took up an entire city block. I probably had on cargo shorts to survive New York's sweltering summer heat, or maybe I wore them to look googly in the office. I can't say. But I remember clearly stepping into the building and staring down the cold, sterile corridor at the elevators. My brain was paralyzed. I wanted to turn and run out and hide under the covers and call my friends and scroll the horrifying words and images on Black Twitter. Even that seemed better than what I would do instead. Shuffle along into and up the elevator to the 15th floor, where I'd be greeted by my oblivious colleagues with a shit-eating grin on my face. The night before, George Zimmerman had been ruled not guilty of second-degree murder in the shooting death of 17-year-old Trayvon Martin. And I was not okay. I was full of grief and fear. I did not feel googly. If my coworkers cared or could tell I was in pain, they didn't show it, and I did just enough to make sure they couldn't sense my anguish.
Yeah, that's a day that I remember like yesterday. I remember exactly where I lived. I remember exactly how I felt that day. That was probably my first day as an adult facing the grotesque reality of just Blackness as expendable in this country, which is something that I was aware of my entire life. I knew about Emmett Till when I was probably 3 years old. I knew about Rodney King when I was 8, but something about Trayvon Martin, which was to say this kid, he lived in this gated community, he had good parents. Good parents. He was one of those kids that was supposed to be protected from this, quote unquote, supposed to be, right? Just like I was supposed to be, quote unquote, protected from all this shit. And he still got murdered in his own neighborhood. And then I had to take that pain from Chelsea, my apartment in Chelsea, to my office in Chelsea, and walk in the door and shift my whole spirit and face and body to look like I was there, ready to be chipper, ready to work, ready to put my head down, answer these emails, because the corporate environment I worked in didn't allow for, or it felt like it didn't allow for somebody to just have a bad day, for somebody to just be heartbroken, for somebody to just experience tragedy. And it felt like the people around me didn't care. It felt like the people around me didn't even notice, to be honest. And I think corporate culture in those last 8 years has shifted somewhat. I think now we're doing, diversity and inclusion trainings and a lot of kumbaya and stuff the day after these terrible things happen. But a couple days go by and some of us are still having to hold on to that heart-wrenching while the others of us move on. And the difference in the brain capacity for the people who are holding on to that is significant, and it's going to affect the way that they're able to do their jobs.
what did you learn through the breadth of these conversations and interviews about that exact point, right? Like dealing with that type of trauma is a constant being Black in this country, especially if you are somebody that is quote unquote successful by American societal standards. Then you're always having to be in that same kind of position, like the kind that you're in, right? Interfacing with people that don't share your pain. Even at best, if they're empathetic, they're not feeling it the way that you're feeling it, right? What did you learn through these conversations about how you can navigate that kind of trauma to then get to the triumph? How do you navigate that in today's world?
Yeah, well, it helps if your profession allows for you to pour your emotion into it. And that doesn't mean you have to be an artist. That means that if you can get into flow state where you are instinctive about what you're doing because you have the repetitions and because you have the subject matter expertise and because you care about it, then it's okay for you to bring your pain into the office. It doesn't mean you're going to walk around telling everybody how hurt you are the whole day and crying and showing it necessarily, even though that would be beautiful if you could, but you can lean into the feeling of those emotions and put it into your work. And that comes from venture capitalists who have shared that. That comes from academics who shared that in the book. That comes from CEOs, pastors. You want to find yourself in a role, in a job in your life where feeling doesn't preclude you from doing your job, where it doesn't slow you down from doing your job. That attachment that we develop as Black people, where we feel terrible and sad and hurt one moment and then have to shift our whole spirit and mind over to do something different, that can be a resource for us if we are surgeons, as an example. If we have a profession where we have to be so precise and have to be so cold about what we're doing, but it can really hinder us when we're trying to do work that requires all of us to be present. So I would say that, you know, I developed that capacity very young. I write in the book about watching someone murdered in front of my high school. I write in the book about sitting still while my classmates read, you know, the N-word over and over and over again in Huckleberry Finn, little things like that, right? Which I'm calling little things. They're really big things, but those help me develop this muscle to freeze, in a way, my emotion and focus on the task at hand. But the cost of doing that is that I'm still learning how to really get back into myself and into my body and really like feel what I'm going through.
Yeah. Always a cost too, right? You talk about the cost. I mean, that's something I think we've been conditioned to ignore, but there's always a cost. You went someplace in the book that surprised me, actually. The fifth chapter, final chapter, is called Spirit, Church, God, and Faith. And the quote that you have is by Toni Morrison. What difference do it make if the thing you scared of is real or not? In this chapter, you asked the question, why do Black people believe in God? I wasn't expecting you to go there, Chad. I don't have to tell you about the sensitivities around that kind of an issue, especially with Black people. You know, you grew up in Maryland, but you went to college in the South. You know, the quote unquote Bible Belt. All right. Why do Black people believe in God? What did you discover when you were exploring the answer to that in this book?
Yeah, well, the first thing I should say as I get into the answer is I believe in God. So I am a believer. I am also a curious person. So it was important for me. The data says that 97% of Black people in America believe in God. That is more than any other demographic. So if we are the demographic most likely to be murdered, most likely to go to prison, most likely to live in poverty, most likely to be hungry, most likely to die of heart disease and high blood pressure. If we suffer in all those ways, why are we the ones that would still believe in a divine creator? That was the question I was seeking to answer. And to find an answer to that question, I went to a pastor who grew up in the Jim Crow South, very dark-skinned man, who lived in North Carolina in a time when having dark skin like his was very literally dangerous to him. And because of the way other people saw his skin and hated his skin, he internalized that hate and became a drug addicted, drug dealing, suicidal criminal at that time. And his name's Roger Jameson. He's a pastor here in Brooklyn. And as I explored this idea of why are Black people faithful? Why do Black people believe in God? What it came down to, according to Pastor Jameson, was desperation. When you feel like you can't put your faith in humans, when you feel like you can't just believe that people will save you, you start looking to other places. You start looking to other beings. You start looking inward, which I think is where a lot of people find God. And that answer to me that we are a desperate people, I don't think that desperation is necessarily weakness. I know that that's how it's perceived in capitalism, but desperation was what made me stop trying to act like a white dude and try to come home. You know, desperation is, I think, where you'll often find people making their most bold and intelligent and courageous choices. And I believe that faith is one of those choices.
So do you feel like Black people's generational adherence and need and quest for faith, to be more faithful, do you think that it is entirely born out of the desperation of Black people's circumstances?
Entirely is that is such a, let me think about that. That's a good question, Will.
Well, you didn't get me on to ask bad questions, Chad. I wanted to, it's interesting because, like I told you, I didn't know that you were going to go there around, conversations of faith and spirituality, and that conversation that you have with Pastor Roger Jameson is such an interesting one. And it's something that, like, you do such a great job in the book of framing these conversations around what it is like to be Black, the trauma of Blackness. And for so many people, the reason I asked that question is because for so many people, were it not for faith, were it not for a belief in God, were it not for the belief that there's got to be a higher power, right? Because if I, as a Black person going through everything that I and my father and my father's father and my father's father's mother and mother before that, if I was going through all that and I had the belief that ultimately man is the final arbiter of truth and of power and of what is right and wrong and is fair, then this is not a life worth living. I have to believe in a higher power in order, again, generationally, just to be able to breathe, just to be able to survive. So I asked that question because you have a lot of people that would say, yes, there has to be this higher power. Otherwise, this life is far too unfair for there, not to be. And then you have other people that would say, this life is so unfair. How could you believe there's a higher power? Right. And so you touched on that. So that's why I asked the question.
And I actually think you just sort of helped trigger what I believe to be the answer there, which is that you get to choose. That is the thing about faith, is you get to choose. You can look at all this and the way that it's built and the way that it's designed and see something horrible and say, who would make something so horrible? Or you can look at this same, and that's what art is. You can look at this same thing, the way that it's designed, and say to yourself, this is flawed, but it's amazing. So I believe that there must be someone out there who made it this way. And as I suggest in the book, that choice, faith or non-faith, is going to affect your actions. That choosing to believe or not believe is going to affect your actions. In the cases of these people in the book, many of them chose to believe, and many of them chose to believe in themselves. And I think that made them take the actions necessary to get where they wanted to go. But it is truly all a choice in my perspective.
It's a good answer. Good answer and a thoughtful answer. What a great conversation, brother. I'll be honest with you. It's as somebody who, uh considers himself a mentor for you, to hear your thoughtfulness around these answers, to hear why it was important to you to make the book, to hear even about your journey and your upbringing, it gives me hope for the future, right? And I don't consider myself like, oh, I'm such an OG. I've been doing it for so long that like I can look at the, look at you, young buck coming up. Like, I do. You might look 12, but you are definitely a grown man, and I appreciate that. But you are definitely also like the next level, the next chapter, the next generation, coming after me. I look at you and I am hopeful because of the way that you frame your thoughts, because of what I know about you and your work ethic, and hearing how your journey got you here makes me optimistic and positive about other people being able to take that path. I'd love to hear from you, because I have to imagine this like even the process of making this book must have been like the most awesome mentorship, tapping the minds of some of these amazing people. Like, look, I'm glad you wrote it down and shared it with everybody, but selfishly, you could have just kept it for yourself, because there's so many gems and nuggets in there. What, coming off of this book and the interactions that you had and the conversations and the interviews, what's your view on the future and where we're headed?
I think we are entering a sort of new Black renaissance across industries. And I think it will be up to us and people who are allies to us to make sure that that renaissance does not go down as something that came and went over the course of a few years, but rather something that came and grew and made for a greater world for all of us to live in. I was astounded and struck by how generous so many Black leaders across industries were with their stories and with their honesty and with their vulnerability, frankly, because some of the decisions we make trying to get from A to Z are embarrassing, and some of them are hurtful, and some of them are painful. So I feel incredibly hopeful. And I have to also say, Will, you give me hope. People like you make me feel like I don't have to digest whiteness as the only form of prestige, and that there are people who look like me who are blowing the doors open so that people like me can walk through them. And you're not selfish about that. You're not self-aggrandizing about that. You really are a very special role model in that way. So I'm grateful and I'm thankful for your time today.
Thank you, brother. I appreciate you saying that. And we got a lot more we're going to do together. Yes, the book is Black Magic. It's available now. Chad, what an amazing conversation. I'm so proud of you, brother. Keep going, keep doing, keep striving, and keep influencing others through your voice. That's why you're here. That is part of the reason why your journey has been your journey. Continue to do that. Don't ever shy away from it. That would be the last piece of advice I would give you. I love doing this, brother. This was fun. Thank you for having me.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Chad, and thank you very much, Will. Again, a reminder, Chad's new book is Black Magic, What Black Leaders Learned from Trauma and Triumph, and it is available wherever books are sold. And feel free to drop a comment in the comment section and keep the conversation going. Thank you.